All right, John Rougeux. What a cool name, by the way. Welcome to Simple but Hard.
Thanks, Ange. Good to be here.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, okay, simple but hard. I told you a little bit, but basically the gist is this, right? I used to think that there was some secret to success. The more I learn and the more I talk to other people that have had success, it's not about some fancy secret. It's about doing the simple but hard fundamentals really well, consistently over a long period of time. So when I think of you, I think category design. And we've had a few awesome conversations about it. So maybe just start by unpacking what is category design? Why is this the hottest thing to talk about in the B2B marketing world? And what are the basics of it?
Okay, sure. Well, first thing I'll say is category design has been around since the dawn of business. People just didn't have a framework for it and the language to describe what they were doing until recently, about 2016. A book called Play Bigger came out that built out that framework and described what this whole thing is. But category design, it's about radical differentiation. That's the place I like to start because it's instead of trying to carve out a little bit of a market share for a category or a niche of products that already exists, category design is about solving a new problem or having a radically different approach to solving an existing problem and building out a new space that you can own and dominate. So I say businesses have been doing that since the dawn of business because that's true in every sense of the word. If you go back to like frozen foods, that was a category that predated digital technology and B2B SaaS and all those things. But now that there's a framework for it, we have the language to it, and there's so much more investment and interest in innovation now. You see companies seeing the need to use category design as a strategy to build out a space and avoid confusing their buyers and talking to them in a way that shows them what problem they're solving and why they're different and why that difference matters.
So good. Okay, so let's talk about this because I think this can frame the stakes of the conversation.
Mhm.
What happens if a company doesn't embrace category design? Is it still possible for them to succeed? What might some of those use cases look like?
Yeah, it really depends on the situation that the company's in before they decide to embark on that strategy or not. So I'll lay out a couple scenarios. We'll try to keep them quick. One scenario is a company's built something innovative, something different, but they don't know how to talk about what they've done. And the problem that happens is buyers like you and me, we have to navigate literally thousands of products and even more just ideas and concepts in our world. To navigate that, we use this mental shortcut called categories. We take something that we don't know about and we lump it into a group of things that we already understand or think we understand. When you're building something new, what happens is you don't have a good narrative to show buyers why you're different. They position you and they position you in a category, a mental category that they already understand. And that's going to work against you. It's going to work against you because they're going to think you do X, but you really do Y. And when they evaluate on you on the criteria for X, they're going to think you do a lousy job of that. What you need to give them is a new framework for understanding what you do. So the consequence, to answer your question, is buyers don't care, or they're confused, or they ignore you because they don't have a good idea of why you matter.
Got it. Okay, so that's the first scenario. New product, new solution, but
Mhm.
don't know how to explain what they've done. Um, the kind of outcome of that is that buyers will just lump you into an existing category and compare you to people that you aren't actually the same as because you have a new solution. But since you can't communicate that, they're just going to lump you in with everyone else.
That's right. And when I say category, Ange, I don't mean like G2's list of categories or Gartner's or Forrester's. That might be the case, but I really mean a mental category, a mental kind of group of products or ideas that your brain has kind of lumped together.
Got it. Okay. Very cool. Okay, that makes sense. So that's the first kind of scenario. What's the second
Mm.
scenario?
The second one I'll mention here is companies in a space and they find that they've kind of outgrown that market. Like we were talking to a company last week. they're the number one player in an existing space. I won't go into the specifics, but they're kind of the highest ranked. They've got the most reviews, best ratings, all that stuff. They understand that the opportunity within that market is limited, though, and for them to really build a company to the level of aspirations that their investors and their founders expect, they have to solve a bigger problem than that current category represents. So their challenge is to think through what is a larger opportunity and how do we frame that opportunity? How do we get our arms around this idea to where we can solve something that causes pain for our buyers today, but isn't so far out in the future that it's untenable or unbelievable or something they can't deliver against. So category design gives them a strategy and a framework for kind of stepping outside their current space and looking for a larger opportunity that gives them better upside on revenue and profits. So the challenge there is if you don't have a good framework for doing that, you'll see companies either lack the conviction to make that move at all, and they'll just kind of play it safe in the space they've been in for maybe many years, or they kind of hedge their bets and they invest a little bit in a bunch of different areas that may or may not have any synergies, and they don't really make a big enough impact to move the company to that next level. So the result is kind of stagnation or wasted effort or misdirection where the ship's not really pointed in one single direction.
Interesting. So as I understand it, right, category design is so much about what's the problem that you solve and what's the narrative about the new future that you're creating. And in this scenario, what you're really looking to do is essentially get the company on board and say, this is the story of the problem we solve and where we're going. And then that really infuses all future innovation for the product. It fuels the business growth too.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a really good point. Sometimes I'll hear a perception that category design is more like a marketing strategy or that it's just for external audiences. And that's true. It is something that helps guide the way you talk to customers, but it's equally used internally to gain alignment on your product roadmap, on your marketing strategy, but even on things like your hiring strategy or the way that you've structured the company or the partnerships that you develop or the kinds of investors that you bring on board. Are they, investors do a lot more than just bring money to the table. They can help you with partnerships or advice or connections. And you can ask yourself, do these align with where we're going with this strategy, or are they not delivering on that, or worse, do these investors have a different agenda that's going to get us off track?
Interesting. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, it is. So quick note on that. I do feel like most of the time it is like a marketing language, like you're saying.
Mhm.
But when you think about it in this scenario, really what you're doing is you're identifying the problem in the marketplace. You're casting the story for the whole marketplace category of solution. And then that infuses what you actually build for them in a way that's radically differentiated than anything else that exists.
Yeah, that's right. Once you have a handle on the problem and you can see it really clearly, and you know its boundaries, the solution becomes a lot clearer. It doesn't mean you've built out your IP or you've built out all the R&D that might go into it, but you can have an idea of the end state that you want to deliver. And once you know where you are today and that end state, it's much easier to get to those steps. A lot of times that's vague and unclear, and it's really hard to develop that path without that clarity.
Would you say that's the biggest problem with people trying to do category design, is that they don't actually define the problem?
The number one thing that I see is people conflate category design with a name, like a category name. And like worst case, they take what they've already built, which is like a commodity product or a Me Too product, and they kind of come up with a cute name for it and think that they can just tell their buyers that this is some new thing that they don't know about because they've got this new category name. And that I call that lipstick on a pig category design. It doesn't really get to what category design is about. And buyers are smarter than that too. They're going to see right through that. You might trick them at first, but category design is not about tricking people or creating false differences where none really exist.
Mm,
So it's the misconception I see is people rush towards the name. They don't really go do the foundational work where they develop the POV, the point of view, where they understand the problem. They've got clarity on that. When you do that well, the name kind of, I wouldn't say it takes care of itself, but it's a lot easier to identify and
mm,
come up with the right terms for. And the name can change. Sometimes it happens where customers have a different take on things and a phrase that they like to use, and that's okay to be receptive to that. It's really that POV, that view on the world that matters. And what I don't see happen is companies naming the problem. I think it's much more important to name the problem
mm.
than it is the category itself. When you can name the problem, then you can give people a kind of a mental label for what you're describing, and it's easier for that to resonate in their minds and start thinking about why that problem matters and why they might want to consider solving it.
Interesting. That's so interesting. When I think about where I've seen category design done well, I think of Refine Labs, obviously, and
Mhm.
the problems that they talk about of like software attribution is
Yep.
broken, right? The lead gen hamster wheel, like it gives you even these like mental uh images of the problem, which
Mhm.
then talk about demand generation and revenue R&D, all that stuff.
Mhm.
Oh, okay. Last
Yeah.
question. I've heard Lockheed talk about personal category design. Um, when you think about that,
Mhm.
if you had to give like an actionable piece of advice to anyone listening, they may be in marketing, they may be a CEO, they may be a soccer coach. What would be your piece of advice of like how can you apply category design thinking
Mhm.
to as an individual?
Okay. Um, so let me set this up by saying another play within the category design kind of sphere of opportunities is niching down, picking a space that you own better than anyone else. Sometimes that can be at a mega category. Sometimes that can be in a subcategory. And like you've talked about, it can be at the individual level. So you might see a solopreneur do this or someone think about this for their career. I think what I've learned, Ange, is um, I started my professional career in about 2005. So what is that, 18 years ago? So there's a point, I think, in everyone's career where you have to shift from being a generalist to a specialist. For me, I spent a few years in in finance and project management. I got into operations and marketing, and I kind of had all of these different experiences under my belt. And then I niched down a little bit into marketing, and then from there, being a marketing generalist will only get you so far, right? So I had to decide, where am I going to go next? What am I best at? What am I bad at? And how can I play to my strengths? And so at that point in my career, I decided I want to niche down on category design because it's a space that few people have a deep understanding of. The discipline is still being built; people are still learning about it, and so and it's an area that I'm passionate about, and I have some experience in. Made a lot of mistakes, done some things well, but I've got that experience to go on. So I saw that as a space that I could, um, steer my own career towards. And I felt like I'd enjoy my career a lot more and have better outcomes by focusing on that instead of trying to be the best CMO or the best tech marketer, or, some other kind of generalist type approach. So just, I would say like, not, I'm not like a career expert. So take this with a grain of salt, but like in a lot of people I know, like when you're starting off in your career, you don't really know what you don't know. And you have a lot of like assumptions about what work might look like. But as you get exposure to more and more things, you start to understand where you might want to go. So not everyone starts out as a specialist, but the sooner you can recognize what that niche is going to be, the better.
Interesting. Interesting. And so would you say to like for whether it be marketer, CEO, soccer coach, whatever, a big part of that, would you say is like naming and framing and claiming the problem? or is it just kind of really like picking your lane and then like owning and dominating that lane?
For your career?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've never really thought about like identifying the problem you solve as your career, not in a deep way. But I think that would be an interesting way to look at it. Like what problem are you solving and for whom? And
Mm.
do you have the skills or do you need to develop new skills or new ways of thinking that help people do that? Like you're I'd love to hear your take. You're doing it as and on the side with your catching coaching. So like have you thought about that yourself? What's your take?
Oh, I've thought about it so much. Yeah. And it's been interesting, right? I think the idea of what type of problem do you solve? Is it a new problem or is it an old problem that you're solving in a new way? Right? For me, I'm solving an old problem, which is baseball catchers don't know how to catch because they've never been taught the fundamentals. And so the problem is that they don't know how to move and they don't know how to learn because so few people have taught. And on top of that, so few people have learned to catch and are able to teach it in a way that makes sense, that's like scalable across like different ages. Um, and so like some of the problems that I've like named, framed, acclaimed, right, is like a caved in stance, like a stance where your knees creep in. And now people are like starting to use that language in the catching community. Um, and the problem with it is that it puts pressure on your knees and it prevents you from being able to receive efficiently because your elbow keeps hitting your knee because it's down in front. And so you have to fix your stance in order to get out of it. Um, and then another kind of term that I've coined is the bounce, which is like when we receive, we want to catch the ball back to the zone in one fluid motion. But what happens, like if I was to throw a ball at you right now, you would put your hands in front of your face. And when that happens and the ball's outside of the zone, if our hand is in the middle, we have to go away and back, which creates a bounce. And so you can see, if you watch big league games, you can tell if a catcher catches it well by whether their glove goes back down and bounces or not. And so, yeah, I've definitely tried to infuse category design into everything that I do, but it's a challenging thing to like really identify what is it like. Am I a remote catching coach? Like that
Mhm.
has confusing to me.
Yeah. No, you're right. Like catching is a skill set or a profession for some has been around since well, what 100 plus years. I don't know when baseball started, but
Yeah,
so that's not new. That's not a new problem, like you said. But you have a radically different approach, and
right.
some of what you're doing isn't even just around the problem. Like the fact that you're investing on YouTube and doing YouTube Shorts as your medium. That's radically different marketing, if you want to call it that, from maybe how other catching programs have worked. So you're thinking differently on more than one plane. And I think the more levers you can pull to differentiate yourself from the standard way of doing things, the more you're falling into that lens of using the category design approach.
Yeah. Well, it's really interesting, John, and I know we're a few minutes over, but when I got my job at Impact, I sent Marcus Sheridan, the author of They Ask You Answer, a video on three things, which was the future of sales, and it was talking about They Ask You Answer, demand generation, and category design all lumped together. And as I've been running this experiment of like teaching what I have learned through catching, uh, it's like this beautiful combination of all three of those where I'm like educating at scale. I'm using category design language also to inform the service that I offer. And then all the content that I'm creating is also creating a ton of demand on the back end. So it's really fascinating. It's like a real experiment that I'm running at scale and I'm learning a ton from it.
Yeah.
So
I, I used to be a catcher when I was in little league. So I wish I had somebody like you coaching me because no, that didn't exist. It was just do your best and try not to mess up.
well, John, thank you so much. You somehow flipped it around, or maybe I just flipped it around and we started talking about some of my stuff, but you shared a ton of great stuff on category design. Um, if people want to find you and connect with you, where can they do that?
Yeah. So two ways. If you want to chat and talk about category design, maybe you got a question or want an outside perspective, we do office hours at Category Design Advisors. So me, Kevin Maney, and Mike Tamphouse. So you just go to categorydesignadvisors.com and you'll see an orange button for office hours. Click that. You can schedule a time with us. Second way, you can find me on LinkedIn. It's hard to spell my last name, but if you're committed, you'll find it, or you can search for John Category Design. That'll probably come up. I usually post every day about category design and related things. So happy to connect on there as well.
That's awesome. And one big takeaway that I have that's fascinating is as if you apply category design to your career and you take that approach of what problem do I solve for
Mhm.
who, then it also then informs your product, aka the skill set that you need to build in order to actually fulfill that kind of category design thinking, which
Yeah.
that's also just super interesting.
Yeah. I think you and I kind of discovered that just chatting out loud today. And it also, it shows you, it gives you permission to say no to opportunities that don't move you in that direction too, which is really powerful as well.
Yeah, because it's a narrative, right? It's like the point of view, it's the problem and the solution, the direction that you're facing. And so if you have that story and values of who what problem you solve and for who and how you're going to help them, then it is a much easier no for maybe an attractive opportunity that comes up that's not in line with where you're trying to go.
Yeah, absolutely.
Interesting. Interesting. Well, John, thank you so much. Any final words?
Hey, thanks for having me. Always,
Absolutely.
always enjoy chatting with you. So we'll have to do it again, podcast or otherwise.
Absolutely.